Hello, welcome back. All right, so we are, because of the times, I had to put emerging adulthood with young adulthood together. So we're covering a large lifespan, think between adolescence development and middle adulthood. So we're talking about a large lifespan here, thinking about 20 to 35. So, the emergence of emerging adulthood, I want to talk about this because this is a new life stage that we're studying, and why is it emerging? So we're looking back and we can see in the 60s and the 70s that there's this sort of foundation laid for adulthood to sort of be pushed back a bit here. So we have the youth movement and the women's movement. The youth movement, basically, we're having young people look at and change the meaning of what adults are and what the roles of our adults are. So we had the youth movement. Women's movement, expanded opportunities for women. We had the sexual revolution occur as well. So think the invention of birth control and a new tolerance for sexual relationships and cohabitation. We also lastly had the technology revolution. So we moved into more of a knowledge economy. So that made our college numbers go up. So participation in tertiary education in college has increased significantly. So if you look at the slides on the bottom right corner is the rise of individuals enrolling in college. And the left chart shows the median age for marriage in the U.S. since the 60s till about the 2000s. You can see a huge increase in the age range of when we're getting the age that we're getting married at, right? So it's later and later since the 60s, and also so many more people going to college. And so we think a combination of all of these sort of revolutionary changes that happened in our culture pushed back adulthood, essentially. The whole like 30s, new 20 is kind of real. So emerging adulthood we're saying is 18 to 25. I'm going to say young adulthood is about 25 to 35. And these are the age groups we're going to talk about this week. All right, so let's go to the next slide, calling 5 characteristics of emerging adulthood. So the research shows there's sort of 5 main characteristics that say, you know what, this person is in this sort of in-between adolescence and young adult. The first one is they are spending quite a bit of time on looking at their identity. They're exploring their identity. So what are my possibilities in work, in love, in relationships? And this sort of exploration leads to their identity, who they are, what are they capable of? What are they not so capable of? What do they believe in? What do they value? These things are becoming more cemented in that time, and they're going to help them take their life course. So identity exploration, number 1 characteristic of somebody who's in this developmental stage. A second characteristic of someone in this developmental stage is this idea of instabilities. So think about your 20s, if you're in them or you were in them or are past them. This is a decade of life when we have some instability. Think about housing. How many times have you changed your residence in your 20s? Typically a lot for most people. So there's this identity exploration. There's this instability characteristic. A third characteristic is this self-focus. They are focusing on themselves as they develop knowledge, skills, understanding of their world, about where they fit in, about their capabilities, and they're really, really working on trying to stand alone as a self-sufficient person and what that looks like. So this self-focus is the third. The fourth characteristic is this idea of falling in between. Oh, you're no longer an adolescent, you're not a teenager, you don't feel like a teenager, but you don't fully feel like an adult yet. So there's this subjective feeling about being in this sort of transitional period of life that people will report during this time, 18 to 25-ish. And then the last characteristic is having this optimism of possibilities out there. So people are pretty optimistic that there's a lot of different futures, things can change, and that there's potential for dramatic changes in one's life. So those are the 5 characteristics that research shows this says, I'm an emerging adulthood. All right, let's go to the next slide. Last slide in sort of this introduction topic here is the question of what makes an adult. So you can see, right, marking the beginning of adulthood is complex. It's challenging, very difficult to do. In this chart on the slide, which is pretty cool, is the question was asked, do you feel you've reached adulthood? Do you feel you've reached adulthood? And you can see yes, no, maybe yes and no's, kind of depends on the thing and the percent and the age, right? So commonly in social sciences, what we use to mark, hey, you're an adult, is stable adult work, a marriage, or long-term sort of relationship, and parenthood. That's commonly what social sciences use as indicators. So, a really interesting study in the past 2 decades or so, they've been doing lots of studies examining young people. They've examined young people across countries, across ethnic groups, across age groups within these young people, across social class. And they found that there were sort of three main markers that were the markers of transition into adulthood. So, the three highest criteria young people said were, this was what makes me an adult, is 1, accepting responsibility for oneself. 2, making independent choices or independent decisions. And 3 is becoming financially independent. So it's kind of interesting that that ran across countries, cultures, ethnic groups, etc., right? So, but when you look at it, those are characterized very much by individualism, right? Emphasis on standing alone, being self-sufficient, very individualistic. So it's kind of interesting. Because when we look at other places in the world, there's other cultural variations of what we say this is adulthood. So in many countries, like in Israel, they complete military service. And that's sort of their marker. You complete the military service for your country, you're an adult. Or in some Asian countries, they may measure a marker for adulthood would be, do you support your parents financially? That sort of thing. So we look at traditional cultures as well, and typically traditional cultures, as I mentioned this before, look at the indicator of marriage, but they also look at indicators of interdependence values. Like marriage confirms interdependence values, right? It strengthens interdependence. So you can see why marriage would be a main indicator for more traditional cultures. And now you are an adult. Okay, so go to your workbook, give that person some advice on the column, answer those couple questions, and then meet me back and we will talk about physical development.